Greetings in the name of the Lord. I am Bill Ewing, pastor of Spivey Memorial United Methodist Church. I greet you, and I want us to look today in the book of Psalms, one of the greatest book in the Bible, written mostly by David. But in King David's life, there were many severe difficulties in his life. And in this chapter 55 of the Psalm 55, David is relating some of the severe difficulties of life. And I want us to think about dealing with the severe difficulties of life. Let us read the 55th Psalm, Psalm 55, verse 1. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me, and hear me. I mourn in my complaint, and make a noise, because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. And I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off, and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. For it was not an enemy that reproached me, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me, that did magnify himself against me, then I would have hidden myself from him. But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and walked into the house of God in company. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings, and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray, and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old, Selah, because they have no changes, therefore they fear not God. He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He has broken his covenant. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. Let us be as David. David truly was going through a time in his life that was of the most severe difficulties of his life. David was the greatest king of Israel, the greatest man of God's heart. He loved the Lord with all of his being, all of his complete being. He loved the Lord, and the Lord loved him. We know the story of David. David was a little shepherd boy when Saul was king of Israel, and God had turned the reign of Saul because Saul had turned against God, and God was going to take away his reign, his throne. David was just a little shepherd boy out in the fields when God called him to come to be the king of Israel. And as David grew in his life, as he stood up, as we know, to the big old giant Goliath, and as he began to lead some of the people of Israel, and he was eventually, as we know, crowned as the king of Israel. But with that kingdom came an awful lot of difficulties. And the severity of the difficulties of life were really great. David had so many of these against him in the last years and through some of the years of his reign, and he truly had to call on and did call upon the Lord, as we must do in these severe times of our lives, in these great difficulties that we are facing with the coronavirus, the loss of employment, the loss of freedom, so much that we are going through in the difficulties of life today. I want us to look at the real severity that David was going through. And he said in some of these words, when he asked the Lord to hear his prayer, he said, "Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise, because the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me." Just listen to all that he is going through. David said, "And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." Suffering, severe things of life will do some things to us. And one of the things that the severe trials of life will do is suffering will bring us to prayer. Suffering will bring us to prayer. We, the children of God, have the greatest blessing, and that is the opportunity and the blessing to be in prayer with God. And these severe times are bringing us, so many of us, to prayer. And I thought, and I think of the old fellow that was having some severe problems with his cold and his cough, and he had been to the doctor different times to find out what he could do about his cold, and He went one time and the doc said, "Oh, I see you're having less problems with your coffee." And the old man said, "Yes, I ought to. I was up all night practicing." And truly, we have a lot of things that we face in our lives today. And all those things should drive us to prayer. We are so blessed to be close to God, knowing that He hears, and it drives us, these severe things drive us into prayer. Also, the severity of these days, this suffering, will drive us closer to God. As we live these lives, and as we go through these experiences that we're going through, if we are truly praying to God, reading His Word, staying in and meditating and trusting Him, we will get closer and closer to God. And the closer we get to God, the less severe the circumstances of our life mean to us. We do have many troublesome times in this world today that we live in. But let's just look also at the source of the severe things that were taking place in David's life at that time. We have looked at the severity. It was so severe that he just wanted to fly away if he could on the wings of a dove and get away from everything. Have you ever felt like you wanted to get away from everything? I'm sure there were times. But I want us to think also about the source of David's troubles. I want you to just think of some of the things that David said. He said in the 11th verse, "Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. For it was not an enemy that reproached me." Listen there. It was not an enemy that caused his troubles. He said, if it was, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me, that did magnify himself against me. Then I would have hidden myself from him. But he said, it was thou. And he's speaking of some man. It was thou, a man mine equal, my guide and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked unto the house of God in company. David was simply saying that the source of his troubles, the source of his severity of circumstances came not from some outsider, but from his family. And that is so troublesome to think that someone in David's family was causing him so much grief. And the person that was causing him the most grief was his son Absalom. And in the book of 2 Samuel, we read the story of Absalom, his son, that wanted so much the throne of Israel that he turned against his father. He would sit in the streets at the door, at the gate of the streets coming into Israel, and he would greet the people coming in to Israel and ask them how they were doing and what things that they needed. And he would tell those people that it was just too bad that King David wouldn't help them, that King David wouldn't listen to them, and he was truly trying to turn the people of Israel against his dad. And that is something that really troubled David. David just said, "It was thou. You walked into the house of God with me. You were my companion." And David knew, and this really troubled him. It really troubled him. Also, David had some friends. You could not really call them a friend, but he had some friends that he really thought a lot of. And Ahithophel was one of his most trusted friends. His friend Ahithophel was with him during some of these severe earlier times, but he was turned against David by some of the other people that wanted Absalom to be the king. So Ahithophel turned against him. David learned of it, and it troubled his heart so much that he just mourned in these verses. He said, "We took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me." Truly, thinking about it, if your own family turned against you and your best friend turned against you, what would you do? What would you do? David did what he knew to do. He turned to God. He said, "As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me." David was just speaking to himself. He was encouraging himself. He needed to have that encouragement. And in your life and my life, I know there are times that have come that we just had to speak to ourselves and say, "The Lord's going to take care of it. Just take it easy. We're going to be okay. We'll come through this." He was encouraging himself. And we must do that in these turbulent times, these times that we're living in. And as David said, God will save us. We have a God that hears, He knows. He knew us when we were in the womb. He has known us, and He will know us until we see Him again in heaven. And truly, as these days come upon us, they come upon you, they come upon me, they come upon people, let us turn to God like we have never turned to God before. And God will see us through. He has promised us that He would never leave us, He would never forsake us, and that all we need to do is to come to Him in prayer and supplication and know that He will hear us and He will bring us through these severe difficulties of life. I just thank God for His tender mercies and His grace that He has given to us and has available to us in His precious Word. I would recommend to you that anytime that you can, read the Psalms. David puts it out there for us. He is one, if not the most beloved person in my life in the Bible, other than Jesus Christ. I like Paul, I like Peter, I like some of the old saints of God, but David is a man that I can relate to, and many can relate to. So as we face what we are facing in the days that we're living, in the days ahead, just remember, God is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. He was with David. He will be with us. Let us hold on to him and know that he is able. I pray earnestly for each and all as we live in these terrible days. I pray that God will be right by your side, that you can just feel his presence and know that he loves you and that he is there. And my prayer for you is that God will pour out his blessings from heaven upon you, and may God truly bless you. Amen.